All right, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending upon what time you woke up, guys. This is Mr. Eschbacher here, coming from the Global Studies Underground Command Center, and today we're going to talk about feudal Japan. I've got our song of the day playing, Godzilla by Blue Oyster Cult. We'll get back to why we think that's the song of the day and what it reminds us about Japan. But first, let's tell Alexa, turn off. Alexa, turn off. And let's get to our lesson. I've got a PowerPoint set up for you guys today that'll go along with your lecture notes. Pay close attention to those questions of the day. What we have to cover for Japan is very, very simple, but it's important because it connects to what you're going to learn about in 10th grade. What we cover today and on Friday will help you for your 10th grade Regents. Alright, first things first, we need to remember Japan is what we call an archipelago. What's an archipelago? It's a chain of islands. Japan was created by volcanoes, and as those volcanoes erupted underground and under the ocean, they created multiple islands. In fact, Japan is a series of hundreds of islands with one main one. Now, why do we care it's an archipelago? Well, that means it's a group of islands. Plus, remember, Japan is very mountainous, and that's going to put some limitations on it, but its island location will also help it in some ways. If you're an island, that means you get to be isolated, if you want to be. It means you're going to rely upon the ocean for food. Sushi, anybody? It means that you're going to have some limitations. Let's also remember, kids commonly forget this, Japan is a part of Asia. It is a part of the continent of Asia, which means it's got some neighbors we'll talk about. Also, what's that thing Japan lacks? Ready? 3, 2, 1. Japan lacks? Good job. Natural resources. Why? Again, it's an archipelago. It's a chain of islands. Imagine a table, but your mom or dad dumped a whole bunch of stuff on it in the form of mountains. You don't have any space to grow stuff. You don't have any places to get natural resources. So it forces the Japanese people to, what's that magic word? You're right, adapt. Again, sushi, reliance upon fishing. Okay? Japan, because it's in Asia, and if you look at our handy dandy map here, here's Japan. Japan is very close to two other countries, China and Korea, which means we see lots of that's right, cultural diffusion, or if you like your enduring issues, interconnectedness. Japan, because of cultural diffusion, took in many traits from China. The Japanese brought in a belief system called Buddhism. Yes, remember, go back to your Eightfold Path and Four Noble Truths. Japan adopted their system of weights and measures. Measure how big stuff is and how heavy things are. They got that from the Chinese. Both Japan and China have an artistic style of handwriting we call calligraphy. The Japanese got that from China. And there are many others. Poor Korea, they have been heavily influenced in both positive and negative ways by Japan. In fact, the Koreans, because they're so close to Japan, a powerful nation, China, a powerful nation, and comrades, Mother Russia, a powerful nation, the Koreans like to call themselves the shrimp among whales. But this all ties together when we get to 10th grade. Again, because Japan is an archipelago in Asia that lacks natural resources, and they're really close to China and Korea. Japan in the early to mid 20th century tried to create an empire. They tried to conquer and take over new territories. Guess what countries they attacked? Korea, China, so they could try to take natural resources. And that's what's going to lead us into World War II.
Your corned beef timer is done.
Hey guys, my corned beef timer is done. Alexa, turn off corned beef timer. This is live TV. Okay, so other stuff that's going to go along with the reading you're doing and the PowerPoint you're going to look at. And again, when you answer my assignments, please do not turn them in until you've listened to my lecture. Come on, you got to see this pretty face every now and then. Japan has heavily been influenced by its belief systems, like many cultures have. In Japan, we talk about two belief systems. The first is called Shintoism. Sometimes you just see it referred to as Shinto. Shintoism is the belief that everything in nature has a spirit, which means it's very similar to, that's right, animism in Africa. Okay? We'll talk more about Shintoism and its influence on Japanese history in a second. But also, we do see Buddhism in Japan. Why? Cultural diffusion from China. Alright, let's go back to Shintoism for a second. We talked about belief systems earlier this year. In Shintoism, the belief is that everything in nature has a spirit, or what we call a kami. The best illustration I can give you is a very particular type of spirit, or kami, called the kamikaze. We all know by now that the scariest motorcycle gang in the history of the world was the Mongols. I feel like John Green, I should have like the Mongol montage or something. Use your imagination. Not once, but twice, the Mongols built massive navies, massive fleets to invade Japan. And the Japanese thought, oh man, that's it, we're doomed. We'll fight to the end, but we're doomed. Twice, the Mongol navy was destroyed. Not by the Japanese, but by massive storms like hurricanes that are called typhoons. And the Japanese believed that they were saved by a wind spirit, or a kamikaze. Now, why do we care about that? Fast forward to World War II, because that term kamikaze will come back. The Japanese told their pilots, you are our divine wind, our kamikaze. The pilots who would intentionally fly into American ships, basically making themselves missiles. We'll come back to World War II. Again, everything we do with Japan is going to build on this idea that it's going to set you up for your global regions next year. Alright. The big thing about Japan is they've got a system of feudalism. Just like Europe in the Dark Ages. Kind of cool, but you've got the same idea existing in two different parts of the world. Now, Japanese feudalism is very similar to European feudalism, with a couple differences. In both situations, you have a low class of people. In Europe, the lowest class were the peasants or the serfs. In Japan, though, can you see that, cameraman? In Japan, the lowest class of people were the merchants, the businessmen. Kind of different. The Japanese regarded the guys who were doing business as the low class people. Then you have the peasants, the farmers, the guys who are paying taxes, and you might say to yourself, Self, how are they paying taxes in Japan? Rice. Yes, rice was used as a form of money to pay taxes. Someone's got to maintain law and order, protect people, and in Japan that's the samurai. They are the Japanese version of knights. Someone's got to control the land. In Europe they had lords. In Japan they had what's called the daimyo. The daimyo are Japanese lords. Here's where it gets a little bit funky. For one thing, in both Europe and Japan, you have very rigid or strict social structures, not a lot of moving up and down. In Japan, it's more intense, more rigid. Here's the weird part. In Europe, in medieval times, the king was at the top of that feudal pyramid. In Japan, he's not there. The Emperor of Japan, we'll talk about in a second, but the guy who truly had the power, who ran life in Japan, was the shogun. The shogun was a Japanese version of a warlord. Think shotgun, almost, okay? In Japan, the emperor was not, quote, a king. He was considered God on earth. Fun fact, in August of 1945, Japanese Emperor Hirohito, again, we're going to World War II, went on radio and recorded a message telling the Japanese people that Japan was surrendering. Now, that was the first time that almost everyone in the nation actually heard Hirohito's voice, because it was essentially hearing, in their minds, the voice of God. Okay? Now, let's go back and talk about those samurai again. Again, the samurai, they are Japanese versions of knights. In medieval Europe, those knights had a code of conduct that told them how to act, and that was called chivalry, if you remember. Chivalry governed the conduct of knights. You have to be brave. You cannot hurt unarmed people. You can't fight and kill people on Sundays and religious holidays. In Japan, they had their own version of chivalry, but it was much more intense. It was called Bushido. Bushido literally means the way of the warrior. And the ultimate part of Bushido is that it is better to die than to be disgraced. Japanese Bushido was all about honor. Surrender was not allowed. It was considered to be a disgrace, and you were better off being dead than dishonored, which unfortunately is going to lead to some negative consequences. For instance, during World War II, the Japanese army was notorious not for taking prisoners, or if they did, for brutalizing prisoners like American soldiers during World War II. It also meant that under no circumstances could you surrender. The Japanese, as American forces in World War II moved closer and closer to mainland Japan, began to have bloodier and bloodier fighting. That's where you saw the kamikaze. Ultimately, it was one of the factors, that led to the United States deciding to use 2 atomic bombs. But even afterward, the Japanese military did not want to surrender. They actually tried, believe it or not, to arrest the emperor so that he could not surrender and disgrace himself. Fortunately, a couple weird events happened, and their plot to stop the emperor from surrendering failed. Okay? Last but not least, when we talk about feudal or traditional Japan, we have to recognize what's called the Tokugawa shogunate. The Tokugawa shogunate was what we think of as traditional Japan. It was a period in early Japanese history where everything was rigidly controlled by the shogun, where the samurai were the soldiers, and Japan was going to really stay isolated. In Tokugawa Japan, foreign trade was not allowed. Foreigners were not allowed in. In fact, people were not allowed to travel abroad. Japan tried to use their island location to be very isolated. That's really going to stay that way until 1853, when an American naval commander named Matthew Perry basically kind of forced his way in and forced the Japanese to sign a treaty. And what that did, once Japan could no longer remain isolated, they had to modernize. And boy, did they ever. And it's that modernization that's going to do a lot to set up World War II next year. So, watch this video. Do the reading in the textbook. Answer those questions for me. Submit your Google Doc to me for grade. If you have an emergency or you have a situation that pops up where you cannot turn it into me by the end of the day, just shoot me an email. Guys, we got to communicate. Otherwise, the expectation is you need to complete each of these assignments. These are effort grades. You do it, you show me great effort, you will get a good grade. Now, what I'm going to do is I have on the classroom something called the parking lot. The parking lot is a Google Doc. I want you to put your questions. Hey, Mr. Ash, I don't understand this. Mr. Ash, explain that. And what I will do is, at the end of the day, I'll go back on, record another video. It'll be real quick, and I'll say, hey, so-and-so needs an explanation of this term. I got a couple people who want to know what's the difference between this and that. Guys, we have to do this in some weird ways. I am going to be here for you. But for now, I'm signing off, and I'll see you soon.